So yeah, I'm going to talk about D3, which is a tool that we've been using for quite a while to do patch management using Jamf Pro. But first I'll start with some history about it. Nearly 30 years ago, we started doing software deployment on our Linux machines with a tool called Depot. Depot was a bunch of basically NFS mounts with CPs and symlinks, and that's how they got stuff out to the Linux workstations in the mid-'80s. And then after a while, that outgrew itself, so they built a new system called Depot 2, also known as D2. You can see where this is going. And it was built, D2 was a package deployment system that was built on RPM, of course, because it was a Linux tool. But then in 2002, when OS 10 came to Pixar, we adopted, we'll get to PuppyTime in a sec, we adopted D2 and started doing package management with RPM on the Macs, which was interesting, but it worked for the most part. But it didn't do any PKG handling because RPMs are not PKGs. So we wrote another tool called PuppyTime that took care of installing PKGs. And it was called PuppyTime because when we needed to do an install that required a reboot, we asked the users to log out. They would log out, the install would start, and by default, it would just hang on a blue screen, and they thought that their machine had crashed, and they would hold the button down and restart it in the middle of an OS upgrade. So we put up a slideshow of cute puppies. Just sit there playing while they were, so they knew something was happening, and they could be entertained by the puppies. So from 2003 to about 2008, we used D2 and PuppyTime, and they gave us a bunch of sophisticated tools for doing automated scoped installs and updates. We could do piloting, so if we had a new package to test, we could put it on a few machines, easily test it on those machines, and then release it company-wide. The whole thing was a command line tool, and therefore it was very scriptable and automatable. And that was also very important for our support philosophy. We're a very command line oriented shop, even on the Macs, because our philosophy is that our users, they're there to make movies, not deal with their computers. We're there to deal with their computers. So we do a lot of things behind the scenes for them. And we just SSH into machines and do a lot of command line stuff. So these tools were all command line, and D3 itself is still all command line. And we also had logout and reboot installations. But unfortunately, in 2007, 2008, the developer of D2 left. And it started getting kind of out of date, and we were like, what do we do next? So what do we do next? There were not a lot of third-party tools around yet in 2008. But given the state of our team and our skills and all that, we said, well, there might be, let's take a look at some commercial ones. We were already using Composer from Jamf as a tool to help us build D2 packages. We could use it to figure out what got installed where, and we could then make RPMs out of that. But since we were already using Composer, we looked at the rest of Casper. As we all knew, even then, its package management wasn't great, but it did a lot of other stuff. And we had a lot of other homegrown tools that we knew eventually someday we'd outgrow. So we looked at Casper and decided that that's what we wanted to work with, especially because they were all okay with us customizing it. So that was the original thought for D3 was, hey, I can just put my own stuff on top of theirs and we can do our package management. This was all happening as Greg was writing Monkey. We didn't know Greg was writing Monkey. So yeah, we just missed it. The first version of D3 was really just a simple wrapper around the Jamf install command. It just added a little bit of extra logic to it to help it understand that package A is just a new version of package B. We first deployed it in 2010 when we rolled out Snow Leopard. D2 wouldn't actually work in Snow Leopard, so we had to port over 200 packages from D2 and PuppyTime into D3. Since then, we've been constantly improving it. In 2011, 2012, when the REST API for Jamf came out, I basically rewrote it from the ground up, splitting it into two libraries, one for dealing with the API and one for dealing with package management. And then I refactored it again immediately after I presented it because Rich Troughton asked me the first question is it open sourced? And I had to say no. It was very much built for our environment. So since then, I rewrote it again so that it could be open sourced. And we open sourced it on April 1st of this year. So it enhances Jamf Pro. Here's some of the things it does to enhance Jamf Pro. First off, it gives patch management. It gives one half of patch management. The folks at Jamf are working on the other half right now, and that is acquiring the patches. D3 works on the same part of it that Monkey works on, deploying the patches, and automatically installing the updates on the clients when they need them. It gives you conditional installs, which policies don't. If you set up a policy to run a Jamf script as a pre-flight, then install a package, then run another Jamf script as a post-flight, if that first script fails, it just keeps rolling along and installs the package, whereas you may not want it to if that script failed, and D3 performs that way. It uses Jamf scripts as its pre and posts, and it uses the Jamf run script command to actually run them, but it looks at the exit status and it won't install the package if the pre-flight fails. We have piloting, so when you add a package to Casper through D3, you can pilot it. It's in pilot mode. You can install it on specific clients. You can easily manage where it's installed, and then when you're ready, you push it out everywhere. You can freeze installations. So if a client has a certain version and you want that client or group of clients to stay on that version, but you want the rest of the company to go up to a new version, you can freeze them and make the new one live, and they'll just stay there until you unfreeze them. It still has PuppyTime. It still displays a slideshow at logout, and the default images that we put out there are puppies. So still has PuppyTime. They still live. It does package expiration, and we'll talk about that a little bit more, but you can set each package that's installed with D3 to automatically uninstall itself after a certain number of days of not coming to the foreground. And that's handy for licensing. Like if you've got month-to-month licenses, but you don't want to manage, you want to put something in self-service and not have to worry about people installing it and then forgetting about it. You just put an expiration on it, and if they don't use it for 30 days or whatever, it just goes away. So it also extends. How does it do this? It does it by extending Jamf Pro, primarily by using the API. It uses it as much as possible, but there's some things that are inherently not there, which is why Jamf's patch management isn't as good as it could be, and they're changing everything. So we use a custom MySQL table in the MySQL database. So right now, if you are using Jamf Cloud, you don't have access to the MySQL database, you can't use D3 because you have to create a custom table in there for it to keep the extra information that it needs about the packages. But you'll see later, that's one of the things we're working on. It uses two Ruby libraries. It's all written in Ruby. It uses ruby-jss, which, I'll get to that next. Ruby-jss is an API. It's an interface to the API, and it's got its own D3 library. It comes with an admin tool called D3admin, a client tool called D3, and several helper tools. And it uses the existing Jamf infrastructure as much as possible. So it uses Jamf's package installation stuff, even though under the hood that's just doing the installer command. I want to stick to Jamf ways of doing things as much as possible. So a lot of it is based on policies. You have to build a policy to do some of this, and you have to use smart groups to do the scoping. That's different from policy scoping, but we'll get to that. But yeah, it uses the Jamf infrastructure as much as possible. ruby-jss is a connected but separate project, and hopefully I'll do some talks about ruby-jss in depth in the next year or so. Ruby-jss it's a Ruby interface to the Jamf REST API. It basically allows you to use the API without using the API. You don't see any XML, you don't see any JSON, you just type simple Ruby code. I'll show you an example in a second. It abstracts all the objects in the API as Ruby objects, and then you use them in very simple ways. It's useful for any kind of API-based tasks. We use it daily for any automation of Jamf that you can think of that you can do through the API. In fact, Ruby has an interactive shell-like interpreter, and you can just start it up, load in the library, and then basically you have a shell to the JSS, and I do that all the time. And we open sourced it in October of 2014 because it's the foundation that D3 is built on, so we got that available. And there's several places that are already using it. Let's see, I think Shopify is using it. I think some part of Microsoft is using it. Here's an example of how to use it. So this is what you'd see in either Ruby code or in the IRB interactive Ruby session. You load in the library, you connect using your credentials, or you can put some of that stuff into a configuration file. Here's how you retrieve a computer group. You make a new Ruby object out of the group with that name, put it into that variable, add a member to it. That's got to be the name of an existing computer, and then you save your changes. And you see no XML in there. That's how easy it is to use it. Yeah, so I'll be talking about that hopefully in the coming year. There's another library, D3. Of course, the original D1 was Depot, and there are lots of things in GitHub called D3. So I couldn't have the GitHub project named D3, so I called it its full name, which is Depot 3. But nobody ever calls it Depot 3, we call it D3. It also is a Ruby module that builds on ruby-jss. It comes with a command line tool called d3admin, which we'll look at a little more deeply in a minute. That's for managing the packages. D3 is the client machine that manages the installations, removals, and receipts on the client. And various helper tools. PuppyTime is a standalone package that does the puppy slideshow while it's doing the installs. D3 helper is a generic tool to help things. Just, it has a function for this and that. We'll go over it on another slide. And RepoMan is a fun tool that does the expiration stuff. And this was open sourced April of last year on April 1st, which was Apple's 40th birthday. So I didn't do it as an April Fool's joke. I did it on that day for Apple. So let's look at D3admin. This is the tool you use to add packages to D3, remove them, make changes. Excuse me. It's basically a command line wrapper around the Casper admin tool. So basically you use D3admin add to add some package to Casper and D3. And if you need to, you can just point it at like a root folder that you'd use in Composer, and it'll build the package for you. Or you can just point it at an existing PKG. You can edit existing ones, and we'll look at examples of these more in a moment. And you can delete them. That's basically the three functions that D3admin does. It also has one more very important function, which is making things live. When you add a package to D3, it is in its status as pilot, and it will not automatically go out anywhere. It's just sitting on the server waiting to be tested. You can then go to whatever clients you want and install it, and it'll just sit there. And when you're ready, you say D3admin live, some specific package, and it'll say, hey, you're about to do this, do you want to? And then every machine that has an older version will automatically get this version at the next time they check in. Well, the next time they do a D3 sync, not a Jamf check-in. So here's a full one-line command. It can actually be a lot longer than this. To add something, using D3admin this way is how you would automate it, and this is what our developers use when they add things. They have scripts that do big, long command lines like that. Some of these options here on the command line are just D3 specific. There's the source for the thing we're going to upload. The description is some of it is D3 specific. Some of it is just Jamf packages. So if you look at a package record in your JSS, there's all these fields you can fill out. All of them are represented here, plus more. But a lot of people can't remember all these long command line options. So you can also do it in a menu-driven way, and there's only like a few of them here, but there's 22 to start with, where you just choose a number. It's all in the command line, but you just tell it what you want. And when you're done, you hit an X, and then it'll build the package, send it up to Casper, and make the entries into the D3 table so that D3 knows about it. You can also use D3admin to search through the packages that are on the server. Here's an example. All the different versions of Transmogrifier. The terminology that I started using when I built D3 is a little different from, so what Patch calls a title or is a group of installers for a single thing of different versions. We call it base name. So base name is transmogrifier, and then each different version of transmogrifier is an addition. So transmogrifier 1.6 is the version, -1 is the release of 1.6. So 1.7-1, 1.8-2, you can see they all have a status. Deprecated means this was live at one point, but is now been superseded by a new live one. Skipped means it never was made live. There's the live one. Pilot means it's newer than live. So you can see about all the packages that are up there, who added them, who made them live. You can search for them. So hey, give me everything. Oh, you can search for groups. So the way it does scoping is a lot simpler than the way a policy is scoped. It still uses computer groups. It doesn't matter if they're smart groups or static groups, they're just groups. And you can see that it says packages that auto-install for that group. This would be the group of all of our Avid editorial workstations. So these are all scoped to auto-install for it, which means that if we add a package that's auto-install scoped for some group, any computer in that group will automatically get the package the next time they run a D3 sync. But the only other kind of scoping we do is exclusion, and for the Func Avid group, we have these. They are not allowed to get these two, and it just basically excludes them. So you can auto-install or you can exclude, and that's all your scoping. But you can create whatever kind of Casper group you want to kind of refine that scoping, and then just use those groups. And you can get reports about what's installed on the clients. So here I'm using D3admin to report on transmogrifier, and it just looks at, it can just look at the most recent inventory report and the receipts, the Jamf receipts to figure it out. But you can also create a special extension attribute that will allow this report to be a little more involved and tell you about what's frozen and what's not. And so you can see what's installed where. And it's really easy to then go deal with those clients. Excuse me. And if you do report -- computers, you can give it one or more computer names, and it'll just say, here's all the receipts on that computer. So, and it's doing all this just by looking through the API for the last data from the last recon. So, and that's why there's this as of column, because that's when the last recon happened. So the D3 client is what runs on the client machines to do the installations. Primarily, those are the main functions, install and uninstall, and that's as easy as that. So if one of our users calls us up and says, hey, I need FileMaker, we don't say, hey, go to self-service and click here and sign in and do that. While they're on the phone, we just SSH their machine name, D3 install FileMaker. And by the time they're off the phone, it's done. Like I said, their job is to make movies, not click around in self-service dealing with their computers. But we're actually changing that. They want to do more of that, so we're starting to put more and more stuff into self-service. Here's how you pilot something. If you just say install FileMaker, uninstall FileMaker, it'll install the currently live version. But if you say some specific version that's newer than the live one, that'll automatically mean it's in pilot. And then it'll stay in pilot until you release it or a newer one, and then it'll get the new one unless you freeze it. So if you want to keep something like in a test group for a lot longer than the live one, you can do that pretty easily. And here's how you freeze something. Hey, D3 freeze FileMaker. Whatever version of FileMaker is currently installed is now frozen. It will not update no matter what happens. And you can manage the puppy queue. So the puppy queue is when you say install this package that requires a reboot, it doesn't actually install it. It just puts its name in a little queue, notifies the user, hey, log out, and then it just waits until they log out. And but you can go in and like remove stuff from the queue if they haven't logged out yet or something. So you can manage the queue with D3. So you can also do queries and reports on D3 itself. D3 admin tells you about what's on the server. D3 reports tell you more about what's on the client and what's available to the client. So list available will show you, hey, what's on the server that I can get. It will not show you things that are excluded for this computer. You can say, hey, what are all the files that get installed by this package? You can say, hey, what package installs this file, or what package is if you've got several. And you can just get a nice little list out of all the details of a single package. You can also say, hey, what's installed on this machine, what's manually installed on this machine. Manually installed means some admin said D3 install blah, as opposed to it automatically getting installed because of the scope. And what's frozen on this machine. D3 sync is the heart of the whole thing. When you say D3 sync, it does all of these different steps. It updates the receipts, so it keeps its own receipt database on the client. It doesn't use the Jamf receipts or the Apple receipts, although those exist. It keeps its own little receipt database. And it looks through that, compares it to what's on the server. If the status of anything has changed, it updates the local receipt to reflect that status. It cleans up the puppy queue if there's anything that is in there that shouldn't be anymore. It updates any installed packages. If there's updates available, it auto-installs anything that should be if it's newly in scope, and it expires anything that hasn't been used in its expiration period, if it has an expiration period. We have this set up to run every 6 hours with a launchd job. You could do it every day through a policy. You could probably don't want to do it every 15 minutes through a policy, but you could. Or you can just do it manually. If like some machine is out of date for some reason and you just want to just like SSH and do a D3 sync and make sure you're all up to date. Then there's PuppyTime. PuppyTime is a little standalone program. We have a policy for it that triggers it at logout. It launches and looks at the puppy queue, and if anything is there, it'll start displaying the slideshow. It updates the slideshow like every 10 seconds or something, and it shows you the status of the install process. It uses Jamf helper.app to do that slideshow. Like I said, it comes with the images of puppies, but it's just a folder full of images. You're welcome to put your own images in there. And then it reboots, or if you'd like to do something else before the reboot, you can have it just execute some policy, and as long as that policy does a reboot, you're fine. D3 helper is just a little binary tool that comes with it, a little executable that comes with it that does all sorts of random little things, and they're growing. Every time we need this tool to do some little task, I'll put it in D3 helper. It can display a puppy notification, or you can use any other means you'd like, but it can be the thing that says, hey, please log out, you've got something in your puppy queue. It generates extension attribute data for enhanced reports, so you can define an extension attribute that just runs a D3 helper command, and it'll automatically spit out the correct output for that extension attribute, which can then be used by the D3 admin reports. It can be used to import existing Jamf package receipts. So if you've already got clients with a bunch of Jamf packages installed, you then want to start using D3, you import those packages from Jamf into D3 itself. They're still Jamf packages, but you're just saying, hey, D3, you now know about these packages. Then on the client, you can use Jamf helper to look at all the receipts for the Jamf packages to say, oh, this is also a D3 receipt, and it'll generate local D3 receipts for them. D3 Repo Man is a little .app, although probably within a year or so, it can be a standalone script. It's written in Swift, and it registers with the OS's notification center to basically be notified anytime anything comes to the foreground. And anytime anything comes to the foreground, it just writes a little timestamp and path into a plist, and that's how the whole exploration process works. It's a launch agent. It kicks off when the user logs in. It runs as them. And it just, like I said, it monitors things coming to the foreground. Every time you bring something to the foreground, it will just make an entry into a plist. And that is then used with the executable path that's stored for the package. And when sync happens, it looks at that plist, looks at anything that has an expiration, and says, hey, does this thing need to be expired? Because it hasn't come to the foreground. So you could, and at first I was thinking about using Jamf's application usage logging to do this, but it's not granular enough, because I might have brought something to the foreground an hour ago, but the last recon was 2 days or a day ago, and I don't want it to go deleting something with that, with that kind of a overlap. So this is instant. As soon as you bring something to the foreground, it's recorded, and there you go. So how do you install D3 and get it going? I've got it on the website. I've got a PKG installer, so you can just install the PKG. It'll install the D3 libraries and all the supporting libraries. It'll install the command line tools. It'll help you get some of the stuff set up for repo man, and then there's instructions available for setting up your Jamf server. You've got to have accounts for it to log into your MySQL server. You've got to create a table and get it populated, and you've got to get a user set up. Right now, this is all very fiddly because we're the only ones using this right now. We built it for ourselves, and one of the reasons we open sourced it was, hey, let's get other people to make some better tools. An installation helper might be good, but there's still a lot of configuration you need to do to get it going. Then you need to add or import some packages into D3, and as I said, D3 packages are Casper packages. They are just the same thing. It's just that they've got to get an entry in this extra table for D3 to know about them. Then you just configure it on your local machine, run a few tests, and then you can deploy that same PKG out to your clients to get D3 installed on them, and then they'll start syncing. So once it's up and running, if you've got a sysadmin who needs to add a package, what's their workflow for adding a package? Say there's a new version of Chrome, new version of Firefox. How do you get it installed? You acquire the package any way you'd like. You can use auto package. You can just go to whatever. D3 doesn't think about how you get it. It's just like Monkey doesn't think about how you get it. Use some other tool to go get it. Once you've got it, you can point D3 at it. Or you can, if it's a homegrown tool, you can just create a root folder, just like if you use Composer, that buried somewhere in Composer's workspace, there's a root folder that represents the root of the target hard drive onto which you're installing. And inside there, you might see an applications folder and a library folder and the whole folder structure for that thing. You can build one of those yourselves and point D3 at it, and it'll just build a PKG for you out of that. Then you say D3 admin add whatever the base name of the thing is, FileMaker, Transmogrifier, or whatever. We actually do have a tool called Transmogrifier, by the way. Then you can pilot it with D3 install whatever the specific edition is of this thing on some machines. Make sure the install works, make sure the software works. Then when you're ready, you just say D3 admin live and then the edition, and it'll automatically start going out. And then potentially you can add it to self-service. To add something to self-service, yeah, it's a package in Casper, so you could just have a policy install the package the way it installs any package, but if you do that, D3 won't know it's installed. You need to install it using D3. So at the very least, you can make a policy that just runs the D3 install command and then put that into self-service, and that'll work, but we've actually started building and we'll soon release in the open source version a sort of standard policy and script wrapper that wraps around that D3 that does a little more user interaction that says, hey, this is installing now, or the install failed, and here's how to click this to get help, or it's a little more involved than just run the D3 command, and then if it fails, you just get self-service giving you this strange error message. So that'll be released probably in the next few months. We're going to start using it more. We've got the shell of it going. So our developers, we have a bunch of developers who write Mac software that we use to make our movies, and they got to push it out to their clients. This is the whole DevOps thing. We usually think of DevOps as how do we as system administrators do things more like developers? How do we do version control? How do we do agile programming, stuff like that? And that's half of DevOps. The other half of DevOps is how do we as system administrators work with the developers to get them to use our infrastructure so that we are all on the same page and they can get their tools out to their audience quickly and easily. That's the other half of DevOps, and that's what our developers use D3 for. So they've got their project in Xcode for whatever they're doing. They're ready to build the next version. They hit build. They have already defined a build script that at the end of the build process does that big long D3 admin command to add their package to D3. It just does it automatically. They just do build, and the next thing they know, it's in D3 ready for pilot. They have then we give them enough access to Casper so that they can create their own smart groups, so they can create their own policies to do their testing, to work with test groups. They can also use ruby-jss or the API on their own to do that automatically. So they deploy to a test group, do their testing. If it's good, they'll make it live. A lot of times they'll have, because there's several different movies in progress at the same time, they'll have this group of people who, they don't want to change the version of that tool because they're getting close to done. We don't want to be messing with their workflow, but we've got all these new features to release to everybody else. So we'll freeze them. We'll then have another group that we're testing the absolute latest version on, and then we release the currently good version out to the whole studio. And they use, like I said, they use smart groups and they use other tools to manage that and keep track of it. Most of the feature requests for D3 come from our developers. Currently they want to have a way to, when they freeze something, to add a note to it and then be able to see that note so that they know that who froze it and when and why and stuff like that. And then when they're ready, they release the new version to the whole company. And it's really easy to roll back. If you just make an older version live, then the whole studio will roll back, assuming that thing can be uninstalled and reinstalled. If something cannot be uninstalled, you can't really roll it back. Examples of things that can't be uninstalled are OS updates, and actually even some like iWork or like Pages or Safari updates or stuff like that, because they mess with some of the system libraries in /system. If you just uninstall and then reinstall an older version, you can break things. So in D3, you can say this thing is not uninstallable, and it won't, and then you can't roll back. But in general, you can. And again, they use ruby-jss or other parts of the API to automate any of this that is automatable. So what about Jamf's patch management? Our goal is, as soon as they roll out stuff that starts addressing this part of patch management, we're going to roll right in with it. I want D3, again, to always ride on top of what they're doing. The goals that we have for how D3 works and what we need in our environment aren't exactly the same as what they're doing, so there will always be some differences. But anything that they're rolling out that works for D3, I'll just start using it. I'm hoping that you'll see here in a minute that as their code grows, my code will shrink because I can just piggyback off of what they're doing even more. We're already starting to use webhooks to trigger the retrieval of new patches. We'll be rolling this out as soon as we can, but we're doing it with auto package right now. We've got a little thing that listens for a webhook trigger saying, hey, there's a new Chrome, a new Firefox, whatever, and then it'll automatically use auto package to go get the package and then put it into D3, and then notify us to say, hey, there's a new thing in D3. We'll probably use patch policies as part of D3's scoping and D3's testing stuff. We'll just build on that, and it'll make D3 even better. And as I said, as their code grows, hopefully mine will shrink. And D3 will always be command line and scriptable. I could totally see building a GUI front end to D3 admin. To D3 client, there's really no point to have a GUI front end because that's self-service, it's already there. So yeah, if anyone wants to build a GUI front end to D3 admin, please get in touch with me. But until it's done, it'll just be command line. So what's next for D3? Definitely want to integrate with auto package and Jamf management. We're working on that right now. I really want to eliminate the need for MySQL access. I've started to play with this. Probably it'll be doing something like what Monkey does. It's going to be a bunch of files on an HTTP server. Probably it'll just be on your primary distribution point. And because most people have that as a HTTP server, so I'll start there. And then we'll just store a bunch of files up there, and accessing those files will replace getting to that MySQL table. An installer and an admin GUI would be handy to make it a little nicer for people to get D3 up and running. App Store and VPP integration. Yep, someday it's on our sites, but we don't use it enough ourselves to really need it yet. And when we do, then that's when we'll build it in. And lots of other, if you go to the GitHub page, you'll see lots of issues and feature requests and a few bug fixes here and there. So lots of stuff coming. So there you go. There's a quick overview of D3 and a few links for it. That's the homepage for D3. That's the homepage for ruby-jss. That's how to get me on Slack, and those are the 3 channels that are relevant. And these slides I just put this morning up on that link. So there you go. Any questions? Rich.
Say you wanted to start using, just starting out with ruby-jss, could that be used completely independently of
Yeah, D3 is built on top of ruby-jss, but you can use ruby-jss to do pretty much anything you'd want to use the API for. Of course, you have to do it in Ruby, but yeah, Ruby is not that different from Python. It's just different enough to be confusing if you really know Python well.
Is it a gem that's published to?
Yeah. If you're familiar with Ruby and you want to install the JSS API gem, actually it's not even called JSS API anymore. It's ruby-jss. Just say sudo gem install ruby-jss, and it'll install it and all of its dependencies, and then you can fire up IRB and say require JSS and start talking to your server and pull down objects and work with them on the fly. Like I do on the fly changes to policies and groups in a shell all the time. It's like I just need to do this one-off thing. It's easier to do it through the API. It's easier to do it just, I don't want to write a script and then run it and then do it. I just want to do it once. It's like, you don't, when you have a one-off thing, you don't write a bash script and then run it. You just do it in bash. Well, when I have a one-off thing, I don't write a script to use the API and then do it. I just do it in ruby-jss. Anyone in it? Well, if that's it, then that's it. I'm around if you look. Did I see a question? Nope. Cool, thanks.